If we take a look in our closet, there is a very high chance that we might find something from Nike. Might be a t-shirt, or it might even be a pair of shoes. It has become one of the household names for sportswear. From sponsoring athletes in the Olympics to World Cups, it has solidified its position everywhere. With collaborating with many celebrities, this sports brand became a brand of style. But it was not always a smooth sailing for the company. It started out inside a garage with a boy dreaming of doing something that would make a difference in the world. The company was not even named Nike at first. So how did this company become this famous? How is it that a market full of tough competitors like Adidas, Converse, Reebok and many others could not stop or compete with the meteoric rise of the company? Let's find out. Let's take a look into the story of the rise of the sportswear giant Nike. Nike was not always named as Nike. But before we get into that, let's talk about the founders of the company, Phil Knight and Bill Bowerman. Both of them knew each other from the University of Oregon, where Phil was a track athlete and Bill was his coach. Phil was a hard worker from the start. He was born on February 24, 1938 in Portland, Oregon. According to a source, when his father refused to give Phil a part-time summer job in his newspaper publishing company, Oregon Journal, Phil went to his rival company, the Oregonian, for the job, for which he had to walk back and forth from the office for about 7 miles each day. He continued his study at the University of Oregon, ran the Oregon track and field program, and worked as sports reporter in Oregon Daily Emerald. Even more impressive was the fact that he completed his business degree in just 3 years in 1959. And in the same year, he also received his Army Reserve Commission, making him a distinguished military graduate. He saw potential in sports and making something around sports that could make a difference. Being a track and field runner himself, he thought that the most impact that any equipment could make was the shoes that the athletes wore. He enrolled at Stanford Graduate School of Business. There, he wrote a paper that was something that would inspire him to make the highly successful company. But that's not until much later. The paper was titled, "Could Japanese Sports Shoes Do to German Sports Shoes What Japanese Cameras Did to German Cameras?" He was referring to the cameras from Nikon and Canon that took over the world and overthrew the German cameras that were considered the best in the world before that. He was focused on importing low-cost, high-quality shoes that Japan made during the time. He completed his master's in business administration from Stanford in 1962. But it seemed like he almost forgot about the idea after his graduation. He went on a trip with his friends around the world. But it seemed like it was destined to be, as they ended up in Japan, specifically in Kobe in November of 1962. This was the biggest turning point in his life. Here he got to know about the tiger shoes made by the Japanese manufacturer Onitsuka. He was very impressed with the quality and affordability of the shoes. He felt like there was a market for this kind of sneakers in the American market. He then set up a meeting with the company directors. But remember, Phil did not have any job, neither did he have any experience in sales. He, however, had his degree in business, so feeling confident, he put on his suit and marched in the office of the Onitsuka members. He worked very hard for his pitch before meeting, and it showed because the members were very impressed with him. Phil showed many numbers that showed that if the Japanese company sold their shoes in America, it could make them large profits. They cost less than the German shoes like those of Adidas and were of comparable qualities. And so, looking at his enthusiasm and his excellent pitch, Onitsuka agreed on a deal, making Phil the distributor of tiger shoes in Western United States. Phil was excited to begin his new venture. The paper he wrote was shaping up to be a reality of the new world. He thought that the tiger shoes would become the new Nikon of the athletic footwear industry. But there was a slight problem. When Phil made the agreement with Onitsuka, they told him that they would send a few pairs to Phil to try out and send them some suggestions. But they were nowhere to be found. Months passed by. There were still no signs of the shoes. And as you might remember, Phil did not have any job. He was running out of money and patience. And finally, fed off of waiting for the shoes, he lost hope and started a job as an accountant in Portland. He was not happy with that job. He was so hopeful that he could revolutionize the footwear industry. He had hoped to do something that could make a difference from when he was a child. But suddenly, after a little over a year, a shipment of sports shoes arrived at his house. He was amazed looking at the parcel. He immediately mailed 2 pairs to Bowerman, his coach at the University of Oregon, to look at the shoes. He was also hoping that he could endorse the shoes to the athletes he coached. To his surprise, Bowerman was so impressed with the shoes that he not only bought the shoes, he also offered to become Phil's partner in his venture. Without a second thought, Phil agreed. Phil had no experience running a business, but with someone by his side, someone he had known for a long time, someone who knew the ins and outs of every shoe that landed in America, he was ready to take on the world. They shook hands and agreed to a partnership on January 25, 1964. And on that day, Blue Ribbon Sports was born. Not Nike, as that is still far into the future. They started the company with the name Blue Ribbon Sports. Both Bowerman and Phil had a 50-50 share of the company. But who was Bill Bowerman? Who is this person that Phil trusted so much? After all, Phil was the one who went to Japan and inside the Onitsuka headquarters to secure the shoes and the rights to sell them in America. But why was he willing to give his coach from his former university a 50% share of the company? Bill Bowerman was an American track and field coach. Over his career, he trained 31 Olympic athletes, 51 All-Americans, 12 American record holders, 22 NCAA champions, and 16 sub-4 minute milers. That is one record that is hard to beat. He knew what was good and what was bad for athletes. According to his athletes, he knew the ins and outs of every equipment they used. Many times when someone brings in new gear, he would try and poke and try to make adjustments to make them better or maybe sometimes worse. But looking at his track records, most of the time it ended up being on the good side. Not only that, many of the shoes that his athletes wore were redesigned by Bill to make them lighter and more grippier so that they can run faster without slipping. He would go to great lengths to make his player gain a legal advantage. Hence, if Bill endorsed that the Tiger shoes were actually any good, they could sell out very quickly given his reputation. Also, during Phil's time in University of Oregon, Bill was his coach and so had made some adjustment for his shoes as well. With all that knowledge that was with him, it was a no-brainer to partner with him, and as it would turn out, it would be a very good decision. Coming back to the main timeline, Phil received his first few pairs, 12 to be exact. His strategy to sell those was something that was nothing short of brilliant. Although at first he went to many stores where he was rejected, he then went to track meets where there are many people susceptible to trying out new shoes. The reason it was a brilliant idea was because the runners could try out the new shoes for the track and then find out firsthand if it was worth their investment. Phil himself quotes, "My sales strategy was simple and I thought rather brilliant. After being rejected by a couple of sporting goods stores, I drove all over the Pacific Northwest to various track meets. Between races, I'd chat up the coaches, the runners, the fans, and showed them my wares. The response was always the same. I couldn't write orders fast enough." He was very happy and asked Onitsuka to send the rest of them. Within the first year, Blue Ribbon Sports sold over 1,300 pairs of Tiger shoes. This made the company $8,000. Looking at the numbers, the partners invested all of their money back into buying more shoes from the Japanese company and selling them in America. But Phil was still working as an accountant during that year, so they hired the first employee to help out with all the work. By 1965, BRS sales had reached $20,000. Bill kept on experimenting with the shoes, picking them apart and trying out new materials, fusing other materials with rubber and many other things. If something worked good, they would send the modifications to Onitsuka, requesting them to make the changes with the next shipment. In 1972, Bill Bowerman created the Moon shoe. When he was experimenting with the shoe, he got the idea of using his wife's waffle iron on the rubber to make a lighter and grippier shoe that would help the runners. In an interview, he said that he was talking to his wife about the puzzle over breakfast when he got the idea. It was called the Moon shoe because the waffle thread was said to resemble the footprints left by astronauts on the moon. He kept on working on the shoe for 2 more years when he finally made a breakthrough. He invented the waffle trainer, which helped grow Blue Ribbon Sports exponentially. It was now being talked about on the same level as that of Adidas and Reebok. The contract between BRS and Onitsuka was coming to an end. The sales numbers were excellent. BRS was selling out every shoe that they bought from the company. With these kinds of numbers, the company should be happy. That's exactly what Phil and Bill thought. They had no doubts that their partnership would continue and they would keep making more and more profit. By this time, BRS already had multiple employees working full-time for them. Phil also left his accounting job and had fully invested in the company. Even though they had such high sales numbers, the company was barely profitable. That's because Phil was investing almost all the money they got back into buying more shoes and inventing better ones. After paying the salaries of all the employees, there was hardly any cash left for him. But this was about to change. When the time came for renegotiating with the Japanese company, Phil was ready with all the numbers and figures, but the company was not very happy. Even though BRS was one of the biggest sellers of their shoes in America, they felt that it was not big enough. They felt that Phil was not right for the job. Onitsuka offered Phil an ultimatum: either give up 51% of the company BRS to Onitsuka to continue selling their shoes, or there will be no further negotiations. Faced with a tough choice, because almost all of their sales were from shoes made by Onitsuka and BRS having no cash to sustain themselves till they find another seller, he thought about selling the company. But he could not do it. He could not come to terms that his life's work would go down in vain just like that. He rejected their offer. Now with Onitsuka almost leaving them and no other manufacturing company in their belt, they were left hanging. Phil called a board meeting to discuss the future of the company. Phil addressed that they will not be continuing with Onitsuka Tiger shoes. In that meeting, Phil said that they would have to start new because the Tiger shoes were heavily tied with Blue Ribbon Sports. People mostly came to their stores to buy the Tiger shoes. So the first employee that BRS hired, Jeff Johnson, who was a runner himself, came up with the name Nike. And that is where the iconic name came from. Nike, that would rule the sportswear industry. But they were in shambles right now. They got the new brand name, but they needed a logo. They hired a graphics designer student from Portland to design the swoosh logo. Although the logo would become more popular than any of them even dreamed about, she was only paid $20 for it. That was the branding of their company sorted out. But the big question still remains: how do they get new products? If there are no shoes, there is no company. Phil then got into contact with an Adidas approved manufacturing company. At this time, they were still under the contract of Onitsuka. It stated that BRS, now Nike, can sell other shoes if it's not any kind of track or field shoes. So Phil contacted the company and asked to redesign the Adidas soccer shoes to football or American football shoes. This was their first ever original Nike shoe, along with the Moon shoe and the Cortez. In 1972, the contract with Onitsuka and Nike finally ended and Nike was able to go on its own. The Cortez became its most selling shoe after the departure of Onitsuka. The new Nike shoes were not up to the standards that Phil was expecting. They were not as great as the Tiger shoes and were mediocre at best. They ran the risk of selling these shoes in National Sporting Goods Association show in Chicago. This was the largest shoe trade show of the year. But to their surprise, the shoe sold extremely well. Phil and team thought this won't go well given the quality, but looking at the numbers, nothing they had hoped had matched. People were buying the shoes in bulk. Everyone was confused. Phil actually went up to some of the buyers and asked them why they were willing to buy the shoe. They said a word that stuck to Phil's mind: trust. They said that they trusted the Blue Ribbon guys. They were straightforward with their promises and delivered on those. So if they said that these new shoes are good enough, the people trusted them. And so began the era of the new shoe giant in the market. They started to sell the shoes aggressively, and the number of shoes sold rose exponentially. The company was riding the wave of success. They were selling out everywhere. People were very pleased with the quality, and the trust between the customers and the company was growing. Looking at the rise, Nike decided to step up their game. They decided to go heavy on the advertisement side. They invested large amounts of money into ads and ad campaigns. In 1976, the company hired John Brown and Partners, based in Seattle, as its first advertising agency. Although they did do a good job with the ad campaigns for Nike, Nike went with Wieden Kennedy for their future campaigns. They are still Nike's primary ad agency. And it was the co-founder of the agency, Dan Wieden, who came up with its most famous phrase, "Just do it." It was so popular in fact that it was named as one of the top 5 ad slogans of the 20th century by Advertising Age. In their first ad, which featured the Just Do It slogan, Walt Stagg featured in it. He was a legend and an icon in the running community. The ad was featured on July 1, 1988. Since then, they have featured many of the top talents in their ad campaigns. They have also earned the awards for the best ads in the years 2000 and 2002. Nike first debuted its sporting uniforms in 1979 by manufacturing the jerseys of Portland Timbers of the North American Soccer League. Throughout the 1980s, Nike expanded its product line to encompass many sports and regions throughout the world. In 1990, Nike moved into its 8-building world headquarters campus in Beaverton, Oregon. The first Nike retail store, dubbed Nike Town, opened in downtown Portland in November of that year. Nike were also interested in sponsoring rising superstars that would endorse their brand and make it popular worldwide. The one that comes to everyone's mind is Michael Jordan. The Jordan's line of shoes, the Air Jordans, are one of the most popular shoes line from Nike. Nike has also sponsored many successful track and field athletes over the years, such as Sebastian Coe, Carl Lewis, Jackie Joyner-Kersee, Michael Johnson, and Allyson Felix. In the 1990s, Nike pushed for the soccer or football business by signing many stars like Romario, Eric Cantona, and Eric Davids. They would continue to sponsor more and more athletes to the point that getting a Nike sponsor would mean that they have made it big. That's how much name Nike was making. Converse were still at the top in the shoe business space, but Nike was inching closer and closer. They were growing at an exponential rate. Seeing this growth and how popular the Moon shoe and the Cortez became, Onitsuka, their former partner, sued them. They thought that it was the direct copy of their famous Tiger shoes. So, not only Onitsuka betrayed them, but later went on to sue them. But eventually, Nike won. And now, with all the legal stuff behind them, they were growing again. And finally, in 1989, they overtook Converse and became the biggest sportswear company. The best part of this competition was that in the 80s and 90s, Nike was competing with Converse, and in 2003, Nike ended up eventually buying the company altogether. The story of Nike is one that inspires many. Not only did two men dreaming of making a difference in the world made one of the most recognizable brands in the world, but also ended up changing how every sports company viewed making their products from there on after. Many companies tried making better and better shoes after the success of the Moon shoe, with Nike making a wave in the industry, filling in the hole of bringing affordable and quality shoes to the American market, delving into advertisements to grow their brand, sponsoring athletes to make their brand go worldwide. All they did was make smart investments into things that no one thought of at that time. Although other brands followed their footsteps, they would never get ahead of Nike. They are now the most popular brand of sportswear, not only in NA, but also in the EU, Asia, and around the world. A coach who gave his everything for his students to succeed by modifying their shoes, to a track and field runner who dared to dream. This was the incredible story of Nike.